Welcome on into the Fantasy Football Forge. It's time to do a quick look at the Jaylen Ramsey trade. Not so worried about Fitzpatrick, Ramsey. It's all about Jonnu Smith trading teams. What kind of fantasy impacts is this going to have? How did it affect my rankings? Let's just go ahead. Let me tell you where I think that this has impacts for the better and for the worse for different players on both teams. Looking at the Miami Dolphins impacts first. And the first thing that you got to do is you go and you look down at this tight ends group here. I like their pickup of Jalen Connors. I think I liked Tanner Connor maybe at some point along the way in his career. But Pharaoh Brown is currently the leader in the clubhouse as their number one tight end according to OurLads.com. Not a great situation. I assume they're going to continue to look for tight end, so that could have further impacts on how we feel about some of these players. But ultimately, I'm assuming fewer targets are going to be going to the tight end this year than they would have had Jonnu Smith remained on the team and been their starter like he was last year, where he got, I think, a 20% target share. So I've pretty much just straight cut in half the amount of targets going to tight ends for my projections. In terms of the players, where do I think the majority of these targets find their way on this roster on a snap in and snap out basis? I would guess Malik Washington, the slot wide receiver. That's going to be my best guess for who's going to be working some of those same route trees, same areas of the field, at least as Jonnu Smith would have been working. So that's the biggest impact, and it really has no impact on my fantasy drafting. I'm still not going to trust a guy who I really do like a lot in Malik Neighbors with Tyreek, Jaylen, Waddle also on the roster in this offense. It's just not something that I'm going to be drafting unless you're in really, really deep leagues. So I did move him up about 10 spots in my rankings from like the maybe back end of the 90s, even into the back end of the 80s, somewhere right around there. So, yeah, not too concerned about that. I did bump Tyreek up one spot. Interestingly enough, I'll reveal exactly who that one spot was with when we get to Pittsburgh. Just ended up being a spot swap between the two wide receivers. And then I bumped Jaylen Waddle up a couple of spots, just giving them a little bit of a boost, assuming it's more likely that they'll get targeted, but I don't know that it ends up having a huge impact on their overall targets throughout the entirety of the season. I also bumped up Achane one spot, another guy going to work, sometimes, some routes going to be working the center of the field. He goes up and lines up in the slot plenty as well. So I do think there's a higher chance that we see something closer to what we saw last year in terms of his targets, which was absolutely fantastic for fantasy football. And now I just think that that's more likely to happen again. So we'll see what the plan is with the tight end room. If they do bring in a big name, obviously, maybe we bring back some of those guys, but wasn't too many massive impacts ultimately here. A little bit of a boost to the rest of the guys who we were thinking about drafting was it. A spot or two in pretty much every case. But I do feel, for instance, even though I didn't move him up a lot, I do feel a little bit better about Jaylen Waddle now. But, how can you not? I would say a big target getter in that offense is gone. So now let's look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, because this is where I think the impacts are a little bit more drastic. In one instance has a bigger impact on my rankings than it does anybody else's. So once again, we're going to start off with the tight ends. Sorry, this website with all its ads, it just bumps around all the time as you're seeing. I apologize for that. Nothing I can really do about it. But outside of that, Our Lads does a really, really nice job with their website, with their roster management on here. So you look at the tight end room. This is a team who ran the most 13 personnel last season, and I believe it was about 15% of their offensive snaps. I expect that to fully continue, which means Darnell Washington will continue to be on the field a lot, which means that they'll have 6 offensive linemen on the field a lot. That feels pretty good for the rushing attack, right? Not that that's a whole lot different than last season in terms of his usage. Another year further in the league, this offensive line, hopefully even better. Just all in all, I'm a little bit optimistic about this running game, and Jonnu Smith has made me further optimistic about that. So we're going to continue to see Pat Freiermuth on the field, Jonnu Smith on the field, plenty. Fantasy-wise, this is just another guy getting targets, and that does hurt the rest of the offense to some extent. So let's just go through how much it's hurting them, in my opinion. For Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth, I moved them down my rankings fairly significantly. I was slightly optimistic, really, about both of them, and I no longer am. In fact, I actually think that even if Jonnu Smith is the number 2 tight end in this offense, I still think that he has the higher upside value here. I have him ranked higher than Pat Freiermuth still, but both back further. If you go back to the Atlanta Falcons just a few years ago when Arthur Smith, the offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh, was the head coach and obviously had his big fingerprint on the offense in Atlanta, you saw Jonnu Smith behind a younger Kyle Pitts outperforming him in fantasy a lot of weeks. So, once again, it doesn't matter to me where Jonnu Smith is on the depth chart. I know that there is a connection already that has produced fairly decent fantasy value. However, I don't think we quite reach those numbers in this offense, or it's at least, I don't think it's going to be consistent enough for Jonnu Smith that I don't really want to take the risk on him. Both of them have gone from players that I would have been fairly willing to take, not necessarily targets of mine, but willing to take, to players that I don't believe that I will end up with anymore. When it comes to the wide receivers, DK Metcalf, I just took the ceiling off of him by a little bit, and that's the player that I swapped with Tyreek Hill. I had DK Metcalf one spot ahead of Tyreek Hill, now he's one spot behind Tyreek Hill. Then the other wide receiver, who they don't even have as a starter, I will be very shocked if Roman Wilson is not the starter over Robert Woods. But I don't know. I'll have to keep my eyes out this offseason because ain't nobody drafting Roman Wilson. Nobody has him anywhere near where I have him in my rankings. I am high up on Roman Wilson, and that doesn't frighten me because there are guys every year that I'm much higher on that I'm correct about being higher on than the public. So, I'm okay going out on a limb, but I do want to make sure that, hey, he's actually going to be out on the field in order to get the targets that I'm expecting to potentially come his way. Nonetheless, Jonnu Smith coming here does take off some of the luster for Roman Wilson for me, so I'm still higher than the public on him, but I'm much more willing to just wait till the end of the draft at this point in time and just pick him up as a complete flyer, despite the fact that he'll be higher than that even in my rankings by a little ways. Also, like I was talking about at the beginning, for the running game here for Pittsburgh, I moved Kaleb Johnson up a spot. I think that this bodes well for the rushing attack, not because Jonnu Smith is some great run-blocking tight end, but I expect this team to be more in 13 personnel, which means I expect them to, I think the plan here is run-heavy, which fits with what Arthur Smith likes to do, and he's a better run blocker than somebody like Calvin Austin is, who will probably be on the field less, I would assume, in this instance. Look at that. They have all the guys. Ben Skowronek, Robert Woods, that other running back of theirs who's kind of like a fullback tight end kind of guy. Cordell Patterson all the way down here. What an interesting group of guys for Arthur Smith to work with. My biggest concern, though, for running backs and the tight ends in this Pittsburgh offense this year for fantasy, just in general, this offense and how good it could potentially be, is going to be Aaron Rodgers, in part like the Aaron Rodgers and Arthur Smith combination. My issues with Aaron Rodgers are, will he be checking out of run plays at a fairly high rate? The offensive coordinator is not going to like that a whole lot, Arthur Smith. But is that something that he's going to be doing? Is that going to be a friction within this offense? Is that something that, if there is friction with it, will Aaron Rodgers cool off on doing that after he gets yelled at for doing that several times? Or will he just continue to do it because he can? He has done that in the past. He has, checked out of run plays plenty in his career. My other issue here is going to be, how willing is he going to be able is he going to be to target his tight ends and his dump-off options, most often being his tight ends or his running backs in other plays. Historically, he likes big plays. He likes to hold on to the ball looking for the big play. He is a big play hunter. He does not like to throw in the short area of the field a whole lot. As he gets older, I think he's been maybe a little bit more willing to do these kinds of things, but those are the red flags that I have for this offense as a whole to some varying extent. Don't know how much they will or will not impact what we get on the field, but that does just leave room for uncertainty overall with this Pittsburgh offense, which just is a concern. That's it for the video. Jonnu Smith having some pretty decent waves on the my fantasy rankings all over the place there. So, peace out. I'll see you soon. Enjoy your July 4th.